Do we want to wait a couple minutes and let people join us, or should I go ahead and get us started so that we can take advantage of every minute? You're muted at the moment.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. So I have just begun our live stream, so you can begin whenever you would like to, if you want to. So we can.
Wonderful, because I want to keep every minute for Cheryl to be sharing her story and her insights with us. So my name is Kate Diamond, and I am a design director with HDR and a enthusiastic board member of USGBC Los Angeles. And we're really thrilled to have Cheryl Durst with us. And I would like to take this opportunity to tell a somewhat personal story about why I'm really thrilled to be introducing Cheryl among our keynote speakers. I, years ago, was partner with Norma Sklaric. It was Siegel, Sklaric, Diamond. We were the largest women-owned practice in the United States. And Norma was the first ever African-American woman fellow of the AIA and a total superstar in the world of architecture here in Los Angeles. Much of her time with Gruen, time with Siegel Sklaric Diamond, and then time with Dirty Partnership. She was a mentor and a critical part of my connection to architecture. But I have learned, particularly as we explore these crazy times, that the best gift she left me was the connection to a professional network of amazing African-American architects, both in private practice and at HBCUs, and an opportunity to stay connected in ways that I never would have if my career path hadn't connected with her. And when we talk about inclusion and we talk about diversity, we need those personal and amazing connections so that we reach out and we include other voices in the conversation. It is extraordinarily important that IIDA, the International Interior Design Association, has a Black woman as the Executive Vice President and Chief Executive Officer. It is amazing that she represents and supports 15,000 members working in 58 countries. It gives a complete change to the perspective of the profession, and I can't wait to learn more from her. Cheryl, I know you have a longer list of things I could add, but I'd really like to leave the time for you. So thank you, and can't wait to hear what you have to share.
Thanks so much, Kate. I'm so honored to be with you all, to be in a Zoom room with everyone. And I am going to get started and share my screen. Got some images here. All right. Presentation mode. And I'm hoping everybody is seeing my screen. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about equity, justice, design, and environmental integrity. In 1969, when I was 7 years old, Amy Pietrzakowski called me the N-word. And she didn't leave it at that. She added some geographic specificity to her name calling. She called me the N-word, lived on the other side of the tracks. I went home and I told my mother, and the first thing that I asked was not about the racial slur. My parents had prepared me from the age of 4 to be called that particular name. But I had not been prepared to be told that something was wrong with my neighborhood. In fact, I had never noticed that anything was wrong with my neighborhood until Amy used the words wrong and tracks. And sure, there was a nightclub, liquor store on the corner, but it happened to be where the Black Panthers gathered. They taught activism by day and kept the neighborhood safe. Remember, it's 1969. And that barbershop on the corner, It was where the Panthers kept their impressive afros shaped up. It was where my father and my uncles and all the men in the neighborhood gathered to look good and feel pride and to share knowledge. It was actually where I met Angela Davis, who scandalized and intrigued all the older Black men who had never met a woman with the audacity to set foot in a barbershop, let alone have her impressive afro shaped and perfected. It was also where my father had held long philosophical conversations with the author James Baldwin whenever he stopped in. And sure, there was a gritty, sooty factory on the other end of the block. Its workforce had been integrated 5 years before, and now it employed the Black and brown men of my neighborhood. I watched my uncle carry his vintage red, black, and steel lunchbox and thermos with pride to the union job that enabled college educations for his children, my cousins. And those tracks that Amy sneered at, the sound of those night trains are amongst my earliest memories. The soothing rhythm and the syncopation was like a lullaby for me. The bells and the whistles and the conductor calls live in my imagination and elicited a very early love of travel and adventure and curiosity about places unknown. Yet Amy's othering of my neighborhood did make me question my mother why there were so many for sale signs that were appearing in the yards of our white neighbors. Remember, it's 1969. In that short span of time, from the 60s until now, I've seen my descriptors change. My mother and father's birth certificates said colored. Mine said Negro. By the time I was in the 4th and 5th grade, the terminology used was Afro-American. And then I became Black, and then African-American. And frequently now we hear person of color. All factors of identity and nomenclature and designation and descent and heritage. But so is place. Place matters. Place determines who we are and our view of the world and what we believe the world thinks of us. Place matters in 1969 and place matters now. You know, as we have this conversation about eradicating injustice and systemic racism, we need to also remember that environmental racism must be addressed and eradicated as well. Racism suffuses nearly every system and institution in the US. And as we're living through this COVID-19 crisis, it has particularly highlighted and magnified that racial inequity and inequality, as it has with so many other injustices that existed before the pandemic. We can look at a lot of demographic data, and particularly about COVID-19, and we clearly see that the Black community and communities of color across the country have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic, both contracting and dying from the disease at rates far out of proportion. Recent findings about the effects of COVID-19 on the human body and how it spreads are highlighting another reason that Black Americans are at risk: environmental racism. The interlocking harms of environmental racism and residential segregation, the health effects of these systems, and the particular way that COVID-19 spreads and affects individuals are combining to contribute to racial disparities. Environmental racism particularly refers to the many ways that communities of color in the United States, Black communities in particular, face greater harm from environmental factors. The term, which was first articulated in studies of waste disposal, toxic dumping, and industrial usage, is now understood to encompass everything from the string of increased industrial use to proximity to power plants and factories, to higher exposure to emissions from mobile sources of pollution like cars, trucks, and ships, and to the disproportionate harm that disasters like Hurricane Katrina do to Black communities. So we talk about diversity in really broad terms, and I'm sharing these images because I don't ever want any of you to use these images when you talk about diversity.
Oh, Cheryl, I
But,
hate to interrupt you, but we
yeah.
can't see images right now. I'm so sorry. So maybe
Oh
try.
no,
Just wanted to reference before.
I am so sorry.
No, it's totally. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I also, when you reference an image, I wanted to make sure that we got.
Yeah, let me try. I tell you let's see, let me try. Let's try share screen again.
Now we got you.
Okay, you got it? Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Cheryl. I
Okay.
appreciate it. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
Sure,
you.
no, I am so appreciative that you interrupted me.
You were on a roll either way, Cheryl, for what it's worth. You were doing a great job.
You were.
Oh my goodness. All right, well, I want to back up and
These are gorgeous slides.
you didn't get to see the cute one of me when I was 7 years old. So I love to show this slide because I don't ever want us using these fake images about what diversity is and how we talk about diversity, particularly in the context of environmental justice. Even the phrase, let us breathe, let me breathe, didn't originate with George Floyd. There have been symposia and a consortium of Black moms put together a program on Juneteenth called Let Us Breathe, because the effects of climate and climate change in the African American community for decades has not allowed people of color to breathe. We need to be clear on terminology and the words that we use. If we aren't clear on the words and the ideas, how will we be clear on the solutions? And when we talk about equity, we need to understand that equity is a process that begins by acknowledging an unequal starting place. So let's think about this. We talk about diversity, but diversity is in fact an outcome. Inclusion is also an outcome. Equity isn't an outcome. It refers to the process a company, a culture, an organization consistently engages in to ensure that people with marginalized identities have the opportunity to grow, contribute, and develop, regardless of their identity. You know, neighborhoods with large non-white populations have historically seen lower property values, meaning that land in those areas is cheaper to acquire, and it obviously leads to greater pollution because the industrial actors, as we say, have moved into those neighborhoods. At the same time, policy choices have acted alongside financial factors to drive dangerous uses towards communities of color and away from wealthier, whiter neighborhoods. And that's all thanks to, as we all know, an imbalance in political power. The harms of emissions, such as cars and trucks, have been concentrated in these communities of color with less political power to resist them. We know that the siting of freeways and shipping centers, for example, you have the confluence of white flight and the concentration of Black communities in inner cities, and the construction of freeways explicitly designed to serve suburban communities break up inner city slums. Even where these trends have mutated or shifted direction recently, there still is continuous environmental harm. This cycle is perpetuated as existing pollution and industrial land use keeps property values low, preventing people of color from building wealth and power through property ownership. Hashtag the American dream. Ownership is wherewithal. Ownership is agency. These environmental factors are used as justification alongside well-documented reasons like school quality and quality of life for white-dominated political systems and individuals to avoid integrating non-white neighborhoods. Communities of color then therefore end up in concentrated areas that face greater environmental harm and are more vulnerable to natural disasters. And the forces of residential segregation again contribute to these systemic barriers that make it more difficult for individuals to move to less environmentally harmful areas. Outrage indeed. I will completely out myself as an angry Black woman, but I'm not the only one who is angry. We know, thanks to this quote by Benjamin Franklin, that it's widespread. Black women aren't the only ones who are angry now. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Environmental justice demands intention. It demands conscious decisions. It demands us to realize our history that includes racial covenants to redlining, to municipal secession and exclusionary zoning, and of political leaders who uphold those systems rather than confronting them. Though the placement of polluting facilities is more traditionally thought of as the marketplace at work, this too is the result of policy choices. It's why we in the environmental community and the design community must become increasingly activist. We're protecting our identity as humanity and the identity of people of color. What is going to be important now and what's going to be important next? I have the privilege of belonging to an organization called the World Future Society. And every year, that organization identifies keywords that surround the culture and words that impend what will be next. And according to the World Future Society, these 12 words will be what matter: empathy, optimism, resilience, wellness, civility, purpose, equity, justice, humanity, inclusion, community, and courage. We all require this stepping outside of our bubbles and our boundaries. We all require the activist nature that's inherent in the design community. I almost think sometimes that design is synonymous with activism. There is a tide that has been turned. And did it start with George Floyd? I don't think so. Did it start with the civil rights movement of the 60s and that little girl that was called the N-word who lived on the other side of the tracks? I don't think so. It started long, long before that. It started when we realized our network of partnership and stewardship with nature and the environment around us. There's a phrase that I like to use within the context of IIDA, that design is important because chaos is so very hard. We're living through such a period of chaos and volatility now that it requires all of us: designer, architect, facility manager, space planner, real estate broker, environmental attorney, all of us to use our design thinking skills to eradicate environmental inequities and environmental racism. Design, like place, will always matter. Stewardship matters as well, and our caretaking of the environment requires us to be the utmost stewards. My call to action: I know that the world that I live in looks at me and defines me sometimes by my physical aspect. But I also know that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. The photo that you see is my great-great-grandmother, who was born a slave and became a suffragette and worked hard for her right to live, to work, to pray, and to vote. I encourage all of us to not only be good stewards, but to be good ancestors. My mantra has always been, with regard to equity, that you can't design for the world if you're not of the world. Let's all be of the world, share the world, protect the world, and make it safe for each and every one of us, safe and equitable. Thank you so very much for your time this afternoon. Be safe, be strong, be resilient. I wish you all the best.
I don't know where we are in our program and whether there's time for Cheryl to take a couple of questions. I saw that there was one specifically on the questions for those of us, and we started the morning with a keynote speaker saying, I am a white privileged woman and I have so much to learn. What images should we be using for diversity? What are the proper images? And you show us some examples of those that you don't think are. Talk to us about what we can do and how we can do that. And then this was a great presentation and really excited.
You know, imagery, Kate, like narrative, matter. And I think, particularly with people of color, acknowledging that we aren't homogenous. I don't speak for all Black people. I don't speak for all Black women over the age of 50 with gray hair. I think it's understanding that we each have a unique, significant, and particular point of